The bullet didn't come through the front door. It came through 62 floors of glass from somewhere across the Han River, and it missed Kang Min-jae's skull by 4 inches. What no one expected, not the 12 bodyguards stationed in the hallway, not the 2 ex-military operators flanking the door, not the underboss who had spent 20 years protecting this man, was that the person who moved first wasn't armed. She was carrying a coffee tray, and she dropped every single cup to save his life. If you've ever wondered what happens when the most dangerous man in Seoul meets the clumsiest woman in the room, stay until the end. Like this story, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this has traveled. The elevator doors opened on the 62nd floor, and Naomi Brooks stepped out carrying a tray she was already losing control of. 3 cups of black coffee, 1 green tea, a small ceramic dish of sugar cubes that had no business being on a tray this size. She had told herself this morning, standing in the elevator on the lobby level, riding up through the gut of this glass tower with her reflection warping in the polished brass doors, that today was going to be different. Today she would be steady. Today she would walk into that office like she belonged there. The tray tilted. She caught it with her left palm. The sugar cubes didn't fall, but 1 cup rattled against its saucer loud enough that Mr. Cho, the head of building security, turned from his station and stared at her the way a man stares at something he expects to break. "Brooks," he said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. Naomi straightened the tray, tucked her chin, and walked down the corridor toward the double doors at the far end. She had been working on the 62nd floor for 11 days. In 11 days, she had broken 2 ceramic mugs, knocked a glass paperweight off a desk that cost more than her monthly rent, sent a full stack of contract folders sliding off a filing cart into the hallway during a board meeting, and once, on day 6, which she had decided to simply never think about again, she had spilled cold water directly onto the laptop of Park Seung-ho, the organization's underboss, during a presentation to 6 executives who collectively controlled more money than the GDP of a small country. Seung-ho had looked at her with an expression she couldn't fully read. Not rage, something quieter, something that felt more like calculation. She had apologized. He had smiled. She didn't sleep well that night. 4 assistants had quit this position in under a month. The agency that placed her had been very clear about that during the intake call. "The client has high expectations," the recruiter had said, in the careful tone people use when they mean something much worse. "He requires discretion, precision, and the ability to operate under significant pressure." What the recruiter had not mentioned, the client was Kang Min-jae. And Kang Min-jae was not simply a corporate executive who ran Kang Global Holdings from the 62nd floor of a Seoul tower. Naomi had figured that part out herself. On day 3, she was a smart woman. She had a business administration degree from a mid-tier Chicago university, 7 years of executive assistant experience across 3 industries, and a specific kind of intelligence that didn't announce itself. The quiet kind. The kind that watched and filed and connected things without making a show of it. She noticed the men who rotated in and out of the executive floor and never once appeared in any company directory. She noticed the way certain phone calls cleared the room in seconds. She noticed the vehicles that idled in the basement parking structure for hours at a time. Late-model black SUVs with plates that didn't match any registered fleet she could find in the building management system. She noticed the way people looked at Min-jae when he moved through the hallway in his wheelchair. Not the look employees gave to an executive they respected. Something closer to the look prey gave to a predator. Something involuntary. She had figured it out on day 3. She had kept coming back on day 4 and 5 and 11. She was a single mother raising a 6-year-old in Seoul on a work visa, and this job paid 4 times what anything else she had found. Her daughter Zuri had a place to sleep and food that wasn't noodles out of a packet. That was the math. That was the whole equation. Naomi knocked twice on the double doors, waited the exact 3 seconds she had learned was required, and pushed them open. The office was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling glass on the north and east walls, the Han River spread out beyond it like hammered steel in the morning light. The furniture was sparse, expensive, and arranged with the kind of precision that suggested someone had spent significant time thinking about sight lines. There were no decorations except for a single-framed ink painting on the south wall, black brushstrokes on white paper, angular and severe. Min-jae was at his desk. He was 41 years old, and he looked like what he was. A man who had survived things that should have killed him, and who had never entirely forgiven himself for surviving them. He was broad-shouldered, with the kind of physical density that didn't disappear just because his legs no longer worked. His hair was black, cut short and precise. His face in repose had the quality of something carved, not handsome in any soft sense, but built with an economy of features that suggested nothing was accidental. His wheelchair was matte black, custom engineered. He moved it with one hand when he moved at all. He was reviewing a document and he did not look up when Naomi entered. She set the tray on the side table designated for deliveries. She had learned that much, and began transferring the cups. 1 cup, 2 cups. "The third one is Seong Ho's," she said, because she had learned he preferred to know before she did things rather than after. Min-jae turned a page. "He's not coming." Naomi picked up the 3rd cup. "Okay." She set it back on the tray. "Do you want—" "Leave it on the tray." "Okay." She stood at the edge of the desk, waiting to see if there was anything else. This was part of the job. The reading of silences, the interpretation of pauses. Min-jae didn't ask for things directly when he could simply stop speaking and wait for the right person to intuit what he needed. She had found, in 11 days, that she was better at this than the previous assistants apparently had been. She didn't know if that made her feel good or afraid. Maybe both. "The Yonsei contract," he said, without looking up. "On your desk. Left stack, 3rd from the top. I flagged the clauses Mr. Park's office sent over yesterday with blue tabs. The ones I think are worth your time have a 2nd tab, yellow." He looked up then. It was the first time this morning he had actually looked at her, and she had not quite gotten used to the experience of being looked at by Kang Min-jae. He had dark eyes that did not hurry. They moved over things at their own pace, and when they settled on you, you understood at a cellular level that nothing about you was hidden. "Yellow tabs," he said. "Yes, sir." A beat. "Why yellow?" "Blue is standard. I wanted something you'd notice." He held her gaze for another second. Then he turned back to his document. "Next time use red." "Yes, sir." She picked up the tray and moved toward the door. "Brooks." She stopped. "The meeting with the Incheon group this afternoon. You'll sit in." She turned slowly. "Sit in. You'll take notes." "I've been taking notes on the other meetings. I didn't realize those were different meetings." He turned another page. "This one requires a different kind of attention." She didn't ask what that meant. She said, "Yes, sir." And she walked out of the office without dropping anything, which she counted as a win. In the hallway, she exhaled. Mr. Cho was watching her from his station. She walked past him to the assistant's desk that had been designated as hers, a small, clean workspace just outside the executive suite, and she sat down and pulled open her notebook and wrote in her careful handwriting, "Incheon meeting, different kind of attention. Find out what that means." Then she underlined it twice. The Incheon group arrived at 2 p.m. There were 4 of them. 3 men and 1 woman, all in suits, all moving with the contained energy of people who were accustomed to rooms like this one and were not impressed by them. The woman, late 30s, sharp jaw, hair pulled back with geometric severity, walked slightly ahead of the others and scanned the room when she entered with the eyes of someone assessing threat vectors rather than interior design. Min-jae received them at the head of the conference table without standing, which meant without acknowledging that he couldn't. It was a distinction Naomi had noticed. He never adjusted himself for the room. The room adjusted for him. Naomi sat in the far corner with her notebook open and her pen ready. She was supposed to be invisible. She was supposed to be furniture. She had done this in 3 different corporate environments before this one, and she knew how to do it. How to watch everything while appearing to watch nothing. How to write without the sound of the pen intruding on the conversation. The meeting began with pleasantries that weren't really pleasantries. Commercial port access, shipping schedules, customs processing windows. The language was ordinary and the subtext was not, and Naomi wrote down every word because words were her raw material, and because she had known since day 3, that in this room, words could be weapons or they could be traps, and often they were both simultaneously. 40 minutes into the meeting, the woman from the Incheon group, she had been introduced simply as Director Lim, said something that changed the texture of the air. "The Northern Corridor," she said. "We need a committed timeline." Min-jae's expression did not change. "You'll have a timeline when I'm satisfied with the security assessments." The assessments have been completed. Not to my satisfaction. Director Lim folded her hands on the table. Mr. Kang, our partners in the Northern Corridor have limited patience for delays. This has been in discussion for... I'm aware of how long it's been in discussion. His voice was flat, not loud, the kind of quiet that made rooms colder. I'm also aware that 3 weeks ago, someone inside your operation sent a communication to a party outside this table. A communication that referenced specific numbers from a document that existed only in this room. The air in the conference room changed. Director Lim's composure didn't break, but it tightened, the way fabric tightens just before it tears. I don't know what you're not being accused. Min-jae picked up the glass of water in front of him and drank from it, unhurried. I'm simply explaining why my satisfaction with the security assessments is the timeline. When I'm satisfied, you'll have your corridor. He set the glass down. Is that clear? A silence that felt like a held breath. Clear, Director Lim said. Naomi wrote it all down. Her handwriting was neat and quick, and she did not look up from the page except once, when she felt the specific weight of someone else's attention and tracked it to its source. Park Seong-ho was standing in the doorway. He had not been announced. He hadn't knocked. He stood in the frame in a charcoal suit with his hands in his pockets and his eyes moving slowly around the room, across the Incheon group, across Min-jae, and then, with a weight she felt physically, across Naomi. He was smiling. The same smile from day 6, when she'd ruined his laptop. She looked back down at her notes. The meeting ended at 3:40 p.m. The Incheon group filed out. Min-jae wheeled himself to the window and looked at the river. Naomi closed her notebook and waited. What did you notice? He said, without turning. She hesitated. Do you want the obvious things or the others? He turned then, slightly, enough to catch her in his peripheral vision. The others. She looked at her notes. Director Lim touched her left wrist 3 times when you mentioned the communication leak. Not her watch, just her wrist. The man on her right, the tall one, his breathing changed when you said Northern Corridor, like he'd been holding it and let go. And she paused. Go on. Mr. Park was in the doorway for 6 minutes. He didn't come in or announce himself. He was watching the room, not you specifically, the room, like he was taking inventory of who was there. Min-jae was very still. 6 minutes, he said. I counted. He was quiet for a long time, long enough that she began to wonder if she had overstepped, if she had said something that crossed a line she hadn't been told about yet. There were so many lines in this place, and some of them were invisible until you were already standing on the wrong side. Type your notes, he said finally. Password encrypt the file. Send it only to my direct terminal. Not to Mr. Park's office? No. She picked up her notebook. Yes, sir. Brooks. She stopped at the door. He was looking at the river again. The late afternoon light was hitting the glass at an angle that turned everything amber, and in it, Kang Min-jae looked like something that had been burning a long time. Good work, he said. She walked out. Her daughter called at 5:15, which was normal. Zuri called every day at 5:15 from the after-school program because Zuri was 6 years old and had decided that 5:15 was the correct time to call her mother, and this was not a decision open to negotiation. Mama, we made clayfish today. Yeah, what kind of fish? A purple one. Mrs. Song said fish don't come in purple, but I told her my fish does because it's from the future. Naomi was at her desk, her notebook open, and she was smiling in a way she didn't often let herself smile at work. That's a good argument. I know. Did you eat lunch? I had... She tried to remember. She had eaten half a granola bar at her desk at noon. Yeah, I ate. You're lying. Zuri. Your voice does a thing. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Her 6-year-old daughter had inherited, with absolute precision and no mercy, Naomi's own ability to read people. I'll eat dinner, a real dinner. Okay. A pause. Mama, is your job still scary? The executive suite was quiet. Through the glass walls, she could see the last of the day's meeting participants clearing the floor, the security staff rotating shift changes, the city outside the windows beginning its slow slide from afternoon to evening. It's a job, baby. All jobs are a little scary. But this one more. Naomi watched Seong-ho move through the executive lobby 50 feet away, speaking into his phone. He glanced toward her desk without looking at her, or appearing not to look. She had noticed that he did this. He was always not quite looking at her. "I'll pick you up at 6:30, she said. "We'll get japchae from the place you like." "The one with the big noodles?" "The one with the big noodles." "Okay, Mama." A small, satisfied sound. "I love you. I love you too, baby. So much." She hung up and sat for a moment with her hand on the phone, and then she opened her notebook and finished transcribing her notes from the meeting. The window shattered at 6:04 p.m. She heard it before she understood it. A sound like reality breaking, a compressed crack, and then a cascading collapse of glass. And her body was already moving before her brain had assembled the information into anything coherent. She was on her feet and through the executive suite door and into Min Jae's office in under 3 seconds, and what she saw was the north window, 62 floors of tempered glass, in pieces across the floor, and Min Jae behind his desk with blood on his jaw from a fragment, already reaching for something in the desk drawer. She didn't think. She went around the desk, grabbed the handles of the wheelchair, and pulled. Hard. The desk chair went sideways and Min Jae's hand came up. Not to stop her, but instinctively to grip the armrest. And she dragged him backward toward the interior wall, away from the windows, using the desk itself as partial cover, and she put herself between him and the open space where the glass had been. "What the?" he started. "Don't," she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. Her hands were shaking. "Don't go near the window." Somewhere in the hallway, voices were erupting, boots on marble, men moving fast. Naomi was breathing hard, crouched beside the wheelchair with one hand on the armrest and her back to the exposed glass wall, and she was doing the thing she always did. She was watching, calculating. The angle of the broken glass, the spread of the fragments, the way the window had come apart. "That wasn't from inside the building," she said. Min Jae was very still beside her. She could feel the tension in him. Not fear, something harder than fear, something older. And when she looked at his face, he was looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. She couldn't name it. She filed it. "No," he said. It wasn't. The bodyguards burst through the door. 4 of them, weapons drawn, and they took one look at Naomi crouched beside the boss's wheelchair and then looked at each other with a confusion that would have been funny under different circumstances. "Sir," the lead bodyguard, June, she'd learned his name, said. His face was white beneath his composure. "Are you? Secure the floor. I want the origin point identified in 20 minutes. Min Jae's voice was precise and completely even. "And get eyes on the east and west sides of the building. Now!" They moved. The room filled briefly with controlled urgency and then emptied again, leaving Naomi and Min Jae in the wreckage of the window, the cold evening air pouring through the gap, the sound of Seoul's 62 floors below. She became aware slowly that she was still holding the armrest of his wheelchair. She let go. "You should," she started. "Why did you come in here yet?" he said. "I heard the window." "My bodyguards heard the window. They were in the hallway and they came in after you." Naomi looked at the glass on the floor. One piece was the size of her palm, still holding its shape, a perfect curved fragment. The light caught it, like something broken that didn't know yet it was supposed to fall apart. "I was closer," she said. "That's not—" He stopped. A muscle moved in his jaw. "That's not what I'm asking." She didn't have a better answer. The honest answer was that she had simply moved, and she didn't have a framework yet for understanding the impulse that had made her move. She was 31 years old, and she had been afraid of most things most of her life. Afraid of not having enough money, afraid of her daughter growing up without stability, afraid of rooms full of powerful people who held her job in their hands. But in the 3 seconds between the sound and the action, there had been no room for fear. There had only been the next thing that needed to happen. "I'm sorry," she said. "I probably shouldn't have touched the chair without—" "Don't apologize." His voice cut her off cleanly. Not unkindly. "Sit down. You're still shaking." She looked at her hands. She was, in fact, still shaking. She sat on the edge of the desk because there was nowhere else and put her hands flat on her thighs and pressed down until the trembling was less visible. The city glittered below them, completely indifferent. The job description didn't include this, she said after a moment. Something crossed his face. Not a smile. Min-jae did not seem to smile in ways that were readily identifiable as smiles, but something adjacent to it. Something that had warmth buried inside it the way heat is buried inside stone. No, he said. It didn't. He fired her at 8 a.m. the next morning. She knew it was coming before she sat down. She had spent the night in the small apartment she rented in Mapogu with Zuri asleep in the next room, staring at the ceiling, running the math on how many weeks the severance might cover, which agencies she hadn't already approached, whether there was a realistic path back to Chicago that didn't feel like defeat. She had cataloged every option and found none of them adequate, and she had gotten up at 5:30 and made Zuri's lunch and put on her best blazer anyway, because the only way she knew how to face bad news was dressed for it. Min-jae was already at his desk when she arrived. He had the look of a man who had not slept, which made two of them. "Close the door," he said. She closed it. "Sit down." She sat. He had his hands folded on the desk in front of him, and he looked at her with that unhurried directness that she had never quite learned to meet without feeling like everything about her was being assessed and categorized. "Last night changes your situation here," he said. "Whoever sent that shot, they had targeting intelligence on this office. If they've been watching, they now have information about you." She kept her face still. "What kind of information?" "That you're not just a secretary." The word landed with weight she didn't quite know how to carry. "I'm a secretary," she said. "You moved first. You shielded me. On a floor full of armed professionals, you moved first." He let that sit. "Anyone who was watching that window last night will have seen that on their scope. They will draw conclusions." She understood then where this was going, and her stomach dropped in a long, slow way. "You're firing me," she said. "I'm releasing you from the position, with full compensation for Mr. Kang." She heard her own voice sharpen, and she didn't try to soften it. "I have a 6-year-old daughter. I'm on a work visa that is tied to this employment. If you terminate my contract, I have 30 days before I have to leave the country, and I cannot—" She stopped. She pressed her hands flat on her thighs the way she'd done the night before, but this time it was fury she was pressing down, not trembling. "I cannot take my daughter back to a city where I don't have work, don't have savings, don't have—" She stopped again. She would not do this. She would not beg. "I'm asking you to reconsider. I'm good at this job." "I know you are." "Then I'm not firing you because you're bad at the job." His voice was quiet, precise. The same voice he'd used in the conference room with Director Lim, the voice that closed conversations. "I'm releasing you because the job is now dangerous for you. There's a difference." "I know the difference. I made a choice." "You made a choice without full information. I had enough information." He looked at her for a long time, long enough that she had to work not to look away, not to let the stillness of him win the silence. "You have no idea," he said, "what you walked into when you took this position." "I figured most of it out," she said, "on day 3. Something shifted in his face. Day 3. "The vehicles in the basement, the men who aren't in the directory, the way people look at you." She held his gaze. "I'm not unintelligent, Mr. Kang. I knew what this was. I came back anyway. For the money." "Yes, for the money, for my daughter." She let that stand for what it was without dressing it up. "So fire me if you have to, but I'm asking you not to." The silence stretched. Outside the window, the west window, intact, morning light coming through it clean and gray, Seoul went about its business, enormous and indifferent and full of people making impossible calculations about what they could afford to lose. Min-jae unfolded his hands. He turned to look at the river. He was quiet for so long she began to accept that the conversation was over, and she was reaching for her bag when he spoke. "You and your daughter will move into the east wing of the penthouse residence tonight." She stopped moving. "Excuse me?" "It's in the same building, 32nd floor. I own it. I heard you." She stared at him. "You want us to move into your building?" "It's the safest location I can offer. If you're a target, your current address is already compromised. The penthouse security infrastructure is, Mr. Kang, you want me to move my 6-year-old daughter into a mafia penthouse? A pause. I prefer the term residential compound, he said, and she had the unsettling suspicion that this was the closest he came to a joke. Naomi sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling and thought about the 30 days on her visa and the 3 months' rent she owed and Zuri's purple clay fish from the future. And she thought about the way Seong-ho had stood in that doorway and not quite looked at her. I have conditions, she said. He turned from the window. Go on. Zuri has her own room, a real one, not a storage room with a cot. Obviously. I continue in the position with a full salary and a security addendum in the contract. I'll have legal draft it today. And nobody speaks to my daughter about what happens on this floor. Not your people, not your business associates, nobody. She's 6. She makes clay fish. She doesn't need to know what her mother does here. Min-jae was watching her with an expression she still couldn't name. Agreed, he said. She nodded, stood up, straightened her blazer. I'll need the afternoon to pack, she said. Mr. Cho will arrange transport. She walked to the door, and she was about to push it open when something made her stop. Some instinct. She turned back. The sniper, she said. Last night. Do you know who sent them? His face closed. Not dramatically, just a slight shift, a pulling in, like a door swinging to without latching. I have suspicions, he said. Are they close? The people with the suspicions? A long pause. Closer than I'd like, he said. She looked at him for a moment. This man who had survived a bomb and built an empire from a wheelchair and looked at the world with the eyes of someone who had stopped expecting it to be fair. And she thought about day 3 and day 6 and the not-quite look in Seong-ho's eyes, and she filed all of it in the place in her brain where she kept things that mattered. Okay, she said. I'll be back at 6. She opened the door. Brooks? She looked back. Don't tell your daughter what floor we're on, he said. Children ask questions. She already knows it's high up, Naomi said. She wants to know if she can see her school from here. For the first time, the thing in his face that was close to warmth moved all the way to the surface. She can, he said, on a clear day. Naomi walked out into the hallway and toward the elevator, and she did not drop anything, and she did not look back, and she breathed very carefully all the way to the lobby because the alternative was falling apart, and she had never in her life been able to afford that particular luxury. The elevator doors closed. The building rose around her. 62 floors above, in an office with one broken window and a river view and a painting of black brushstrokes on white paper, Kang Min-jae sat at his desk and did not reach for the phone that had been buzzing since 7 a.m. The caller ID read, Seong-ho. He let it ring. The east wing of the penthouse was larger than any apartment Naomi had ever lived in. Zuri walked through it with the solemn, assessing expression of a 6-year-old conducting an architectural review. The floors are shiny, she announced. They're polished concrete, Naomi said. I like them. Zuri moved to the window. The city spread out below, all lights in motion, the Han River a dark ribbon beyond the towers. Mama, I can see the school. I know. It's tiny. It's far away. Zuri pressed her forehead against the glass. Are we going to live here now? Naomi looked at the room, the real bed, the good mattress, the closet that was larger than her previous kitchen, and thought about the contract addendum that was being drafted downstairs and the visa extension that Min-jae's legal team had already been told to initiate, and the fact that for the first time in 14 months in this city, she felt something she hadn't let herself feel, something that was cautiously, dangerously adjacent to safe. For now, she said. Is your boss nice? Zuri asked, still looking at the city. Naomi thought about the not smile that was close to a smile, the way he'd said she can, on a clear day. He's complicated, she said. Zuri turned from the window. She had her mother's eyes, dark and precise and always going a little deeper than the surface. And she looked at Naomi with an expression that was 6 years old and somehow ancient. Complicated is okay, she said. Clay fish are complicated. They take a long time. Naomi sat down on the edge of the bed and pulled her daughter against her, and held on a little longer than she usually let herself hold on, and Zuri, who understood without being told when her mother needed that, held on too. Outside the window, Seoul burned with light. Somewhere in the buildings, 30 floors above them, or 30 floors below, or perhaps right here in the walls, something was already moving toward them that neither of them could see yet. Park Seung-ho had called 9 times by midnight. Min-jae had answered none of them. And Naomi, lying awake in a bed that was softer than anything she had slept in since she couldn't remember, was reading the notes she had taken in the conference room, the ones she had encrypted and sent only to his direct terminal. And she was thinking about a man who stood in doorways for exactly 6 minutes and smiled the way people smiled when they already knew how the story ended. She turned off the light. Outside, the city didn't sleep. And the walls of the building that was supposed to keep them safe held a secret that was 3 weeks old and growing heavier by the hour. A secret that wore a charcoal suit and carried itself like a man who had already won, and who was even now making a phone call that would change everything. 3 weeks inside the penthouse building, and Naomi had developed new habits she hadn't asked for. She checked the corridor before she stepped off the elevator. She noted which bodyguards were stationed where and when they rotated, and whether the rotation happened on schedule. She had memorized the faces of the 12 men who worked Min-jae's security detail, and she had given them internal names. Not the names they'd introduced themselves with, because most of them hadn't, but descriptive tags her brain had assigned automatically. Scar Chin, Left Leans, the one who always smelled like instant ramen and checked his phone when he thought no one was looking. She hadn't chosen to start doing this. It had simply happened, the way calluses happen. Pressure applied repeatedly until the skin hardens without being asked. Zuri had started at a new school, a private international school 3 blocks from the building, with a security protocol that Min-jae had arranged without being asked, and that Naomi had reviewed in detail before agreeing to. The school had cameras at every entrance. The after-school program ran until 6. The route between the building and the school was 4 minutes on foot and 8 minutes by vehicle, and Naomi had walked it twice to know it in her body, not just on a map. Zuri liked the new school. She had found a friend named Hana, who also made things out of clay and had strong opinions about which colors were underutilized in art. They had apparently agreed that orange was criminally neglected and were mounting a joint campaign. This was the thing Naomi held on to, the orange clay campaign, the normalcy of it, the way a 6-year-old could live inside a building full of armed men and still spend her mental energy on the injustice of underrepresented colors. She held on to it very carefully, the way you carry something fragile through a crowd. The first real confrontation happened on a Tuesday. Naomi was in the executive suite filing room, a long, narrow room off the main corridor where the physical records were stored in fireproof cabinets with biometric locks. Cross-referencing shipping documentation against the Incheon meeting notes she had encrypted 3 weeks ago, when she heard Seung-ho's voice through the wall. The filing room shared a wall with the secondary conference room. The wall was thick, and sound didn't travel through it cleanly, but it traveled. She had noticed this on day 8. She had been very careful since then not to let anyone know she had noticed it. She stood still and listened. Seung-ho was talking to someone in a low, controlled voice. The kind of voice that was quiet on purpose, that had been intentionally reduced. She could not make out every word. She caught fragments, phrases. Not moving fast enough. The window was supposed to... If he keeps the woman close, we have to adjust. She stopped breathing. Not stopped in a dramatic way. Stopped the way an animal stops. Complete cessation of unnecessary biological noise. Everything diverted to listening. Adjust the approach. The girl is a complication. Her hand, flat against the filing cabinet, went cold. She made herself breathe. In through the nose, slow and deliberate, 4 counts. Out through the mouth, same. She had read about this once. Tactical breathing, the kind they taught people who needed to make decisions while their nervous system was screaming at them to run. She had thought, reading it, that she would never need it. She needed it now. The voices on the other side of the wall shifted. Footsteps. A chair. The conversation was ending or moving. She waited until she heard the secondary conference room door close, and then she waited another 90 seconds, counting in her head, before she opened the filing room door and looked out into the corridor. Empty. She walked to her desk. She sat down. She opened her notebook to a fresh page and she wrote down, from memory and in the neutral language of observation, every fragment she had heard. Not interpretation, just words, just the sequence. Then she sat and looked at what she had written and understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that she was not a bystander in whatever was happening in this organization. She had stopped being a bystander the moment she grabbed that wheelchair. The question was what she did with that. She requested a meeting with Min-jae at 4 p.m. His assistant, the secondary assistant, a young man named Tae-woo who handled scheduling, told her the boss was in a call that would run until 5. She said she would wait. She waited in the corridor outside the executive suite for 47 minutes with her notebook on her lap and her pen cap clicking in a way she only noticed when June, the lead bodyguard, gave her a look. She stopped clicking the pen. At 5:08, Min-jae's office door opened and 2 men she didn't recognize came out. Suits, no building IDs, the kind of shoes that cost more than her monthly rent, and Tae-woo waved her in. Min-jae was at the window. He had been spending more time there lately, she had noticed. He looked at the river the way people looked at something that wasn't going to answer them, but that they needed to ask anyway. "You said it was urgent," he said. She closed the door. "I was in the filing room this afternoon, around 2:30. He turned from the window. Something in her voice had caught him. She could see it, the slight recalibration in his attention, the way his stillness became a different kind of stillness. "The secondary conference room shares a wall," she said. "Sound carries if you're quiet." A pause. "What did you hear?" She opened her notebook and read it to him. Every fragment, every word she'd captured. She read it in the same tone she used for meeting notes. Factual, unembellished, without editorial comment. When she finished, she closed the notebook and looked up. Min-jae's face was stone. Not the stone of composure. The stone of something that had been stone for a long time and was, under the surface, at significant temperature. "The girl," he said. He said that. Yes. He used that word specifically. "Girl." "Yes, sir." The muscle in his jaw worked once. He moved to the desk and set both hands flat on it and looked at the surface for a moment like he was reading something in the grain of the wood. "You're certain about what you heard?" "I wrote it down immediately. I didn't reconstruct from memory. I transcribed while it was still current." "Who else was in the room with him?" "I couldn't tell." One voice responding. "Male. I don't have a voice match." He straightened up. "Don't repeat this to anyone. Not Tae-woo. Not June. No one on this floor." She had already known that. She nodded anyway. "Is Zuri at school right now?" The question landed with a weight that she felt in her chest. "After school program," she said. "Until 6. He looked at the clock on the wall. 5:11. He picked up his phone and dialed without looking at the number, and when it connected, he said, in Korean, 4 words she understood, "Eyes on the school." Then he ended the call and set the phone down and looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not the assessment look, not the closed-door look, something that looked like it had cost him something to let out. "I should have moved faster," he said. It wasn't directed at her. It was the kind of thing a man said when the room was empty and forgot for a second that it wasn't. "On what?" He refocused. "Seung-ho has been in this organization for 19 years. He was my father's second before he was mine. He said it the way you say something you have already said to yourself so many times it has worn smooth. There have been inconsistencies. I cataloged them. I took my time. And now he's adjusting his approach because of me." "Yes." She let that settle. Let herself feel the full weight of it, the specific gravity of being the variable that had changed someone's plan. Then she set it aside because she didn't have the luxury of sitting with it. "What do you need from me?" she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "You've done enough." "That's not what I asked." The muscle in his jaw again. He moved to the window, not to look at the river this time, but because it gave him something to do with himself that wasn't sitting still. "I need you to continue doing exactly what you're doing," he said finally. "Looking, listening, writing things down, pretending that you are only what your job description says you are." He paused. "Can you do that?" She thought about the filing room, the cold clarity of those fragments, the way her hand had gone still against the cabinet. "I've been doing it for 3 weeks, she said. The emergency evacuation drill was Seong-ho's idea. He brought it to the executive floor meeting on a Thursday morning, 10 days after Naomi's conversation with Min Jae. A standard recommendation, he said, given recent security incidents. All high-rises of this classification were required to conduct quarterly drills. They were overdue. He had already coordinated with building management. Min Jae approved it without visible reaction. The drill was scheduled for the following Monday, 10 a.m. Naomi spent the weekend thinking about it. She couldn't have said exactly why the drill bothered her. On its surface, it was reasonable, procedural, exactly the kind of administrative action that a responsible underboss would propose in the aftermath of a sniper event. It ticked every correct box. That was part of what bothered her. She had grown up watching her grandmother play cards, and her grandmother had always said, "Watch the person who has the right answer too fast. The right answer takes time." The person who already has it was looking for the question. Monday arrived cold and overcast. Naomi was at her desk at 9:15, watching without appearing to watch as the building management representatives moved through the floor with clipboards, identifying assembly points, testing intercoms, doing everything that building management representatives were supposed to do during drill preparation. At 9:40, she got up and went to refill her coffee. The kitchen was at the far end of the corridor, past the secondary conference room, past the auxiliary stairwell door. She was filling her cup when she noticed the auxiliary stairwell door was propped open with a rubber wedge. She looked at the wedge, looked at the door. Auxiliary stairwell doors on the executive floor were kept locked. She had never seen one propped open. Fire code required them to be accessible from the stairwell side, but not the office side without a key card swipe. She pulled the door open an inch and looked into the stairwell. She saw two things. First, the stairwell was dark. The standard emergency lighting that should have been active during pre-drill check was off, which meant either the lighting system was being tested or it had been disabled. Second, there was a sound. Below her, maybe 2 or 3 floors down, the careful sound of someone moving who was trying not to make sound. She let the door close. She walked back to her desk at the same pace she had walked to the kitchen, not slower, not faster. And she sat down and picked up her coffee and opened the scheduling software on her computer and pretended to review the day's calendar while her mind ran calculations at a speed that felt physical. The drill was at 10. It was 9:46. At 10 o'clock, the alarm would sound. The executive floor would evacuate. Standard protocol. Everyone to the designated assembly point on the 38th floor sky lobby, using the primary and auxiliary stairwells. In an evacuation drill, Min Jae's wheelchair would require the auxiliary stairwell because it had the wider access channel. And in the auxiliary stairwell, the emergency lighting was off, and there was someone already positioned below. She had 14 minutes. She looked across the floor to where June was standing at his station outside the executive suite. She could go to him. She had information that should go to security. She thought about the fragments through the wall. We have to adjust. She thought about the unidentified voice that June might belong to or might not, and that she had no way of verifying. She thought about her grandmother and the cards. She got up and walked into the executive suite and knocked and went in without waiting for a response. Min Jae was on a call. He looked up when she entered with the expression that meant, "This better be worth it." She held up her notebook, opened to the page where she had written, "Auxiliary stairwell, propped door, lights disabled, person below, 14 minutes." He looked at the page. He said into the phone, in a voice that gave nothing away, "I'll need to call you back." He ended the call and looked at her. "How certain?" he said. "Certain about what I heard, not certain about the interpretation." "But you have one." She held his gaze. "The drill routes your chair through the auxiliary stairwell. If someone wanted access to you in a controlled chaos moment with the emergency lighting down, that would be efficient," he said. The word was perfectly flat. He picked up his phone. He did not call June. He called a number that Naomi had not seen him call before, and he spoke in Korean for 40 seconds. And when he hung up, he looked at her and said, "The drill proceeds. Everything proceeds exactly as scheduled." She stared. I want whoever is in that stairwell to believe their plan is working." His voice had a quality she hadn't heard before. Not cold exactly, but compressed. The way pressure compressed before it released. "If we abort the drill, we lose them. They disappear back into the organization, and we start over. And if the plan inside that stairwell is more than one person, then my people will handle it. He moved his chair from behind the desk with a single push. You will take the primary stairwell with Tae-woo and the administrative staff. What about Naomi? Her name, not Brooks. The first time since she'd started. It stopped her completely. Zuri is at school. I have 2 men on that building right now. She is the safest person in Seoul at this moment. Do you understand? She breathed, counted. Yes, she said. Go back to your desk. Act normal. When the alarm sounds, follow the posted procedure. She went back to her desk. She sat down. She looked at her screen and saw nothing on it. Her hands were completely steady, which she found oddly clinical, like her body had made an executive decision to skip fear and go straight to whatever came after. At 10 o'clock exactly, the alarm sounded. The next 8 minutes were the longest of her life. She moved with the administrative cluster, Tae-woo, 2 accountants, a legal clerk, and a woman from compliance whose name she still didn't know, down the primary stairwell, 9 flights to the designated sky lobby assembly point, where building management staff in orange vests were counting heads and logging names on tablets. She counted the orange vests. She counted the exits. She stood at the edge of the cluster with her arms crossed and her eyes moving, and she waited. At minute 4, she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear, a sound from deep inside the building, behind the walls, a heavy impact, then nothing. At minute 6, her phone buzzed, a text from a number she didn't have saved. 2 words. Floor clear. She exhaled. At minute 8, Min-jae arrived at the assembly point. June was on his left, another operative she didn't know on his right. And Min-jae was composed and present and gave the building management representative his name for the head count without any indication that anything had happened 8 minutes ago in a stairwell 3 floors above their heads. He didn't look at her. She looked at him. She clocked one thing. The way he held himself in the chair had changed by 2 degrees. A tension in the shoulders that hadn't been there this morning. Small enough that no one else would catch it. She caught it because she had spent 3 weeks cataloging every increment of his posture. Something had happened in that stairwell. He didn't want her to know what. She filed it. Proceed. That night, at 9 p.m., Zuri was asleep, and the penthouse was quiet, and Naomi was sitting on the kitchen counter with a glass of water. She had never figured out how to sit at the enormous kitchen table alone. It felt wrong. Too much space. When Min-jae came through the door that connected the east wing to the main residence, he stopped when he saw her. I knocked, he said. I didn't hear. He moved to the other side of the kitchen island and set his hands on the counter and looked at the surface with the wood grain expression again. He looked like he had made a decision on the way here and was still testing the weight of it. They found 3 men in the stairwell, he said, armed, using our own evacuation drill as the access window. It was precise, well-designed. A pause. It was Seong-ho's design. She wrapped both hands around the glass of water. He wasn't there himself. He doesn't get his hands dirty anymore. He hasn't in years. Another pause. The 3 men aren't talking. They won't. What happens now? I move against him. His voice was flat. Publicly, within the organization, I have enough. The stairwell, the men, the drill. It's enough to take to the senior council and dismantle his position formally. She looked at him. Something about the way he'd said publicly bothered her. What's the problem with that? He looked up. The weight she had noticed in his posture was still there, visible now at close range. Seong-ho built half of the senior council, he said, over 19 years. He chose them, promoted them, holds debts and favors. If I move publicly, and he's already prepared for it, he stopped. A civil war inside this organization right now, with the Incheon corridor still unsettled, with Director Lim watching every move, it would be catastrophic. Not just for me, for everyone inside these walls. The silence stretched. Naomi put her water glass down. She turned and walked to the hallway that led to the filing cabinet, where she kept hard copies of the documents she'd archived from the executive floor. The ones she printed because she was old-fashioned about paper, because paper couldn't be remotely wiped. She opened the 3rd drawer and flipped to the back and pulled out a folder she had assembled over 11 days of small, careful accumulations. She brought it back and set it on the counter in front of him. He looked at it, then at her. What is this? Everything I noticed. Every inconsistency in the operational logs from the last 3 weeks. The shipping documentation that doesn't match the Incheon meeting notes. The equipment requisitions that went through Seung-ho's office and never appeared in the formal records. The communication logs with timestamps that have been scrubbed, except I printed them before the scrub on day 14 because they didn't match the preceding day's log, and I wanted a record. She put her hand flat on the folder. It's not enough on its own, but if you already have the stairwell and the men, he opened the folder. He read, not fast. He read the way he did everything, completely, with full attention, missing nothing. She watched him turn pages and watched his face stay still while something behind it moved. When he finished, he closed the folder. He did not say anything for a long time. I need to make a copy of this, he said finally. I made 3. One is in a location outside this building that no one on your payroll knows about. He looked up at that. I wasn't sure, she said, who I could trust inside this building. A long, long pause. That was the right call, he said. They stayed on opposite sides of the kitchen island with the folder between them and the city doing its glittering, indifferent thing outside the windows, and Naomi thought about the fragment through the wall. The girl is a complication. And she thought about Zuri asleep in the next room with her clay fish and her orange campaign. And she thought about what it meant to be standing in this specific kitchen at this specific moment. Then Min-jae looked at her and said the thing that made it irreversible. I need to hold this privately. Inside the organization, through channels Seung-ho doesn't own. It will take time. And until it's done, he stopped. His jaw set. Until it's done. You cannot let him know we have this. You cannot let him know you built it. If he realizes what you've seen, I know, she said. Naomi, if he realizes, I know what he'll go after. Her voice was very quiet. I know exactly what he'll go after. The name neither of them said sat in the kitchen like a third person. Zuri. Min-jae held her gaze with an intensity that felt almost physical. I will not let that happen. She believed him. She wasn't sure that was rational. She wasn't sure rational was the correct instrument for this situation. She believed him the way you believed the only structure still standing when everything around it had come down. Not because you'd tested it, but because it was the only option left, and sometimes that had to be enough. Okay, she said. Okay, he repeated. He took the folder. He left through the connecting door. Naomi stood in the kitchen in the dark for a while, listening to Zuri breathe through the baby monitor she still used even though Zuri was 6 and had opinions about it. The breathing was even and slow and completely peaceful. The breathing of someone who had no idea that a decision had just been made in the next room that could not be taken back. Then Naomi picked up her water glass, and she went to check the lock on the front door and the window latches. And she stood at Zuri's doorway and watched her daughter sleep for a long time before she was ready to go lie down herself. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and listened to the building settle around her. Somewhere above her, 30 floors up, a man who had survived a bomb and 19 years of the closest kind of betrayal was sitting at a desk with a folder of evidence that she had built piece by piece over 3 weeks, evidence that was now the most dangerous object in Seoul. And somewhere in this same city, Park Seung-ho was sitting with the knowledge that his plan had failed again. And beginning with the cold patience of a man who had survived 19 years by never making the same mistake twice, to the folder was gone by morning, not stolen, not misplaced. Min-jae had taken it deliberately through the connecting door, and Naomi had let him, and she had spent the night in the particular kind of sleep that wasn't really sleep, the kind where you're horizontal and your eyes are closed and your body is performing rest while your mind runs laps around everything you can't control. She was up at 5:15. Zuri's alarm was set for 6:40. Naomi had an hour and 25 minutes of silence, and she used it the way she always used early silence. At the kitchen counter with coffee, her notebook open to a fresh page, writing down everything her brain had processed overnight without her permission. She wrote, 3 copies. 1 outside the building. That was the right call. She underlined it. Then she sat with the pen hovering over the page and thought about what Min-jae had said. I will not let that happen. She thought about the way he'd held her gaze when he said it. She thought about how much weight she had placed on 4 words from a man she had known for 32 days. She wrote, Is that enough? She didn't underline it. She closed the notebook when she heard Zuri's feet hit the floor in the next room. the specific double thump of a 6-year-old landing with complete confidence in the structural integrity of floors, and she put her face into something that was not quite a smile, but would pass for one at 6:40 in the morning, and she went to help her daughter get ready for school. The text came at 11 a.m. She was at her desk on the 62nd floor, working through a stack of procurement authorizations that needed executive sign-off before end of week, when her personal phone, not the work phone, the personal one, the number she had given to exactly 4 people in Seoul, buzzed with a message from a number she didn't recognize, a photo. She opened it and the world tilted. Zuri, on the school playground, laughing at something off camera, her head thrown back, her hands out to her sides the way she stood when something struck her as genuinely hilarious. She was wearing the yellow jacket with the hood, the one Naomi had bought her 2 weeks ago from the market near the building. In the background, half visible beyond the chain-link fence at the playground's perimeter, a black sedan sat at the curb. Naomi knew that sedan. She had seen it in the building's parking structure 14 times. She had noted the plate number on day 9 because it never moved during business hours and then was always gone by evening, which was an unusual pattern. She had written the plate in the back of her notebook under a heading she'd labeled Vehicles, irregular. It was Seong Ho's car. She sat at her desk and looked at the photo and did not move for 11 seconds. She counted them. Tactical breathing. 4 in, 4 out. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way that felt mechanical, like a clock she could hear ticking in a room that had gone completely quiet. Then she got up and walked to the executive suite and went through the door without knocking. Min-jae was not alone. 2 men she recognized as senior council members, older, gray-suited, the kind of men who had been in rooms like this one for decades, were seated across from him. All 3 looked up when she entered. She crossed to the desk, set her phone face up in front of Min-jae, and stepped back. He looked at the photo. Something happened to his face that she had never seen before and did not want to see again. It was not rage. Rage had heat, had motion. This was something that went in the other direction, a compression. Like everything human in him was being pressed down into a single point at the center. He looked up at the 2 council members. "Get out," he said. They got out. The door closed. Min-jae picked up the phone and looked at the photo for a long time. Long enough that Naomi had to work to stay still, to not pace, to not do the thing her body wanted to do, which was move. Go to the school. Go now. Cover the 4-minute distance between this building and her daughter with her own body, if that's what it took. "The plate in the background," she said. Her voice came out level. She didn't know how. "It's registered to... I know whose car it is." He set the phone down. He did not look at her when he said, "Call the school. Tell them Zuri has a dental appointment. Have them bring her to the front office." He picked up his own phone. "I'll have someone there in 6 minutes. I'll go myself." "You will not." His voice was not loud. It was the compressed thing under pressure. "You will call the school. You will let my people bring her back here. If you go to that school right now and he has someone watching, and he does, Naomi, he has someone watching, you confirm that the photo worked. You show him exactly where you break." She stood with her hands at her sides and her jaw tight, and every instinct she possessed screaming at her to move, and she made herself not move, and she breathed and she said, 6 minutes. 6 minutes. She picked up her phone and called the school. The 6 minutes were the longest she had experienced since the window shattered on the 62nd floor, and those minutes had been bad. These were worse, because at least during the window she had been moving. This was stillness under pressure, which was harder. This required a different kind of architecture. At minute 7, her phone buzzed. A text from the same operative who had sent Floor clear during the evacuation drill. This one read, "Package secure, en route." She exhaled so hard she had to put her hand on the desk. Min-jae was watching her. He had been watching her for the entire 7 minutes with the expression she still didn't have a name for, the one that had cost him something. She was starting to understand that it was the expression he wore when something had gotten past his defenses, and he hadn't yet decided what to do about that. "She's okay," he said. "I know." Her voice broke on the second word. Just slightly. Just enough that she heard it. "I know she's okay." "Naomi, don't." She pressed her fingers to her mouth for a second, put herself back together. "Don't be kind right now. I need to... Just give me a second." He gave her a second. She used it well. When she lowered her hand, she was steady. Not recovered, mas. Steadiness and recovery were different things, and she had learned a long time ago not to confuse them. But functional. Operational. He knows about the folder, she said. Min Jae's expression confirmed it before he spoke. Yes. How? A pause. The pause was a fraction too long, and Naomi, who had spent 32 days reading his pauses, felt it land differently than the others. How does he know, Mr. Kang? He moved his chair from behind the desk. He moved to the window. The west window, intact, the river in the distance. And he stayed there with his back to her and his hands in his lap, and she looked at the line of his shoulders and understood, with a specific kind of dread, that he was about to tell her something she was not going to be able to unfeel. 2 nights ago, he said, I brought the folder to a meeting with 3 council members I believed were outside Seong-ho's network. He stopped. I was wrong about one of them. The room was very quiet. Which one? She said. It doesn't matter. Which one? He turned. He looked at her directly, the way he always did, with the eyes that didn't hurry and didn't hide. Councilman Beck, he said. He's been with Seong-ho for 6 years. I didn't know. My intelligence on the council was... A pause that carried something she had never heard from him before. Something like damage. Incomplete. Naomi looked at the floor. She looked at it the way you look at a surface when you're working very hard not to let your face do what it wants to do. Then she looked up. The other 2 copies of the folder, she said. Seong-ho knows they exist. Beck would have told him yes. Does he know where the outside copy is? No, only you know that location. Okay? She pressed her hands flat on the desk in front of her. His desk, she was standing at his desk, and she would think about that later, the geometry of it, what it meant that she had moved there without noticing. Okay, so we lost the element of surprise on the council approach. He knows we have the documentation. He knows he's been made. And his response... She picked up her phone, the photo still on the screen, her daughter laughing in a yellow jacket. His response was this. Yes, he's not trying to hide anymore. No. Min Jae's voice was completely flat. He's accelerating. The implication spread through the room like cold air. If Seong-ho was accelerating, if the photograph was not a warning but an opening move, then the careful, deliberate approach they'd been building toward was already obsolete. The timeline had just collapsed. Whatever was going to happen now, in days, not weeks. And every piece of the plan that had depended on controlled timing and Seong-ho not knowing what they held was gone. The 3 men from the stairwell, she said. You said they weren't talking. They won't. But Seong-ho knows we have them. He knows what they saw, what they did. He knows that's also on record. She was thinking aloud, which she almost never did in this office. She processed privately and presented conclusions. But there wasn't time for that architecture right now. He's already exposed, which means he has nothing left to lose by moving fast and hard. That's correct. And the organization's senior council, how many of them are genuinely his? A long pause. I thought 4. Now I believe it may be 6. Out of how many total? 11. She did the math. More than half. If Seong-ho called a formal council vote on any matter of organizational leadership, he could win it, cleanly, legitimately, within the structure's own rules. He didn't need an accident in a stairwell anymore. He didn't need a sniper across the river. He had the votes to remove Min Jae through the organization's own process, installed through 19 years of debt and patience and the long game that Naomi's grandmother would have recognized immediately. He played a long game, she said. The longest. And we just showed him our hand before we had enough cards. Min Jae looked at her. In his face was the same damage she'd heard in his voice. The acknowledgement of a mistake made by a man who did not make mistakes cheaply. Yes, he said. We did. The door to the executive suite opened. June entered with Zuri on his hand, Zuri in her yellow jacket, backpack still on, looking around the office with the bright, assessing curiosity of a child who had been told she had a dental appointment and clearly knew she did not have a dental appointment. Naomi was across the room before she knew she was moving. Zuri accepted the hug with the tolerant patience of a 6-year-old who understood that sometimes adults needed this and it was just something you let happen. I don't have a dentist appointment, Zuri said into Naomi's shoulder. I know, baby. Are we in trouble? Naomi pulled back and looked at her daughter's face, the dark, precise eyes, the small, serious mouth, the dried orange clay still under one fingernail from yesterday. She brushed the hair back from Zuri's forehead. We're fine, she said. Zuri looked past her at Min-jae. She had met him exactly once, in a hallway encounter that Naomi had tried to keep brief. She looked at him now with the uncensored directness of a child who had not yet learned that staring was rude. Are you the boss? Zuri asked. A pause. Yes, Min-jae said. My mama works really hard, Zuri said. She doesn't eat lunch. Something crossed Min-jae's face, the warmth thing, moving up again from wherever he kept it. I know, he said. I'm going to fix that. Zuri considered this, apparently decided it was acceptable. She looked back at her mother. Can I have my tablet? In a minute. Naomi stood up. She looked at June. She stays on this floor. She does not leave this floor for any reason. I don't care what the reason is. June nodded. Yes, ma'am. She turned back to Min-jae. He was watching her with an expression that was, she realized, not the usual catalog of expressions she had learned. It was new. It was the expression of a man watching someone make a decision they couldn't take back, because she had already made it. She had made it when she walked into the filing room and stood still against a cabinet and listened. She had made it when she built the folder. She had made it 32 days ago when she stepped off an elevator with a coffee tray she couldn't quite control and walked toward double doors at the end of a corridor. Tell me what you actually need, she said. Not what you want to protect me from. What you actually need. The silence lasted 4 seconds. I need to know which of the remaining 5 council members can still be trusted, he said. And I need to know before Seong-ho moves again. Which means I need it in hours, not days. How do I find that out? You can't, not directly. Then indirectly. He looked at her for a long moment. Seong-ho called an emergency council session for tonight, 8 p.m. He's framing it as a security review, a response to the stairwell incident. He'll walk in with a narrative that positions me as the threat to organizational stability. His voice was precise and completely without self-pity. It's elegant. Use my own security failure as evidence that my leadership is compromised. And if he has 6 votes, he wins tonight. Yes. So we need to know before 8 p.m. which of the undecided 5 are actually undecided and which ones he already owns. That's correct? And the only way to find that out? She stopped. The shape of it was assembling in her mind, the way the filing room fragments had assembled, the way the stairwell had assembled. Is to give them something to react to, give them information and watch what they do with it. Min-jae went very still. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't a question. My 3rd job, corporate insurance. There was an internal leak and nobody could find it, so I leaked something wrong on purpose and watched which client got spooked. She held his gaze. It's not complicated. People tell you who they are when they think they're responding to information not being tested. A long pause. What would you need, he said. Access to the internal communication system, and something worth leaking, something Seong-ho's people would recognize as significant and pass to him immediately if they received it. He thought, there's a document, a financial instrument, an asset transfer I've been preparing as contingency. It references offshore accounts that Seong-ho has been trying to locate for 2 years. If his council members see it, they'll move fast to get it to him. Then we send it to all 11 members. Same time, same message. And we watch who forwards it, who calls him, who acts like they just found what he's been looking for. In 4 hours. In 4 hours. Min-jae looked at her across the office. The city outside was cold and gray and enormous. Zuri was in the corner with her tablet, already absorbed, feet swinging off the edge of the chair, completely sealed inside whatever she was watching. Outside the door, 12 men rotated through their positions with weapons and earpieces and the coiled readiness of people who solved problems with force. And here was Naomi, 31 years old, a degree from a mid-tier university, a notebook, 11 days of careful, invisible accumulation. You understand, he said quietly, that if this works and he loses the vote tonight, he has nothing left but the most direct approach. I know. Direct means he comes for what matters most to you. She looked at Zuri, at the yellow jacket, at the orange clay under the fingernail. I know, she said again, so we make sure it works completely. Not halfway. Not enough to expose him and leave him standing. All the way. Min-jae held her gaze. All the way what? He said, and in his voice was something she recognized now. Not the warmth thing, not the stone thing, but something in between, something forged, something that had been made by pressure over a long time and had come out harder and more. The document went out at 3:47 p.m. Naomi sent it herself, from a terminal Min-jae had unlocked with his own credentials, to all 11 council members simultaneously. One message, one attachment, a financial instrument that referenced 7 offshore accounts Seong-ho had been trying to locate for 2 years, dressed in the language of contingency planning, formatted to look like something that had been accidentally routed to the full council instead of to Min-jae's personal archive. It looked like a mistake. It was the most deliberate thing Naomi had done since she'd walked into this building. She sent it, and then she sat back and she breathed and she watched the screen. Min-jae was at the desk beside her. Not at his own desk. He had moved to the secondary workstation along the east wall, close enough that she could hear him breathing, and he was watching the communications monitoring system that his technology chief, a quiet man named Dae-sung, who had shown up with a laptop and no questions, had set up in the 40 minutes before the message went out. Every outbound communication from every council member's registered device in the building, calls, messages, data transfers, would be logged in real time. They had 4 hours and 13 minutes until the council session. The first response came at 3:52. Council member Young, 62 years old, 24 years in the organization, who Min-jae had categorized as uncertain, forwarded the document to Min-jae's own secure inbox with a message that read, "Believe this came to me in error. Returning immediately. Clean. Simple." The action of a man who recognized something sensitive and wanted it off his hands. Naomi noted it. Young. Clean. At 3:58, Council Member O called Min-jae's direct line. Min-jae let Dae-sung log the call without answering. O left a voicemail. Received what appears to be a misdirected document. I haven't opened the attachment. Please advise. His voice on the recording was slightly elevated. Not panic, but the specific anxiety of a man who understood the weight of what had landed in his inbox and wanted no part of it. Naomi noted it. Oh, clean. At 4:03, nothing from Council Member Baek, which they already knew about Baek, so that was not new data. At 4:07, Council Member Park Il-sung, no relation to Seong-ho, the organization had 2 parks at senior level, which had always struck Naomi as an administrative inconvenience, forwarded the attachment to an external encrypted address that Dae-sung flagged in 12 seconds. Naomi felt Min-jae go still beside her. Il-sung, he said. That's 3, she said. 3 of Seong-ho's. Baek, Il-sung, and the data transfer confirmed a 3rd channel that Dae-sung had caught at 4:11 from Council Member Choi, routed through a proxy that was transparent to Dae-sung's monitoring and apparently to no one else. He has 4 of the 11 locked. You have at least 2 clean. That leaves 5. 5 is the session majority, Min-jae said. Then we need at least 3 of the 5. They watched the screen. The next 20 minutes were the kind of slow that had weight to it, each minute landing with physical presence, the seconds accumulating like pressure in a confined space. Naomi's coffee had gone cold. She hadn't touched it since she sent the document. Her back was tight from sitting at the wrong angle, and she didn't adjust because adjusting felt like movement she couldn't spare. At 4:29, 2 more council members responded to Min-jae's line within 6 minutes of each other. Both clean, both returning the document with language that was almost identical in its carefulness. Which told Naomi something. Those 2 had called each other before responding. They were aligned, cautious, and they were not Seong-ho's. 4 clean, 4 compromised, 3 unknown. At 4:41, Dae-sung said quietly, Sir, Seong-ho just called a pre-session gathering, private. His residence floor, 6:30. Min-jae looked at the clock. 6:30 was 90 minutes before the council session. A pre-meeting to align his people, coordinate the narrative, make sure the vote landed exactly where he needed it. Who accepted? Min-jae said. Min-jae. Dae-sung checked. Baek, Il-sung, Choi. A pause. And 3 others. The acceptances came from Councilmember Ryu, Councilmember Nam, and another pause. Councilmember Wu. 6. The full count. Confirmed. The three unknowns had just identified themselves. Naomi put her pen down on the notebook and looked at the page. And the page was full of names and arrows and times, and it looked, she thought abstractly, like the inside of her brain had been printed out in ink. She felt Min-jae looking at her. 6-5, she said. Yes. He wins the vote. Yes. Unless. She picked the pen back up. Unless we change what the vote is about. She laid it out in 8 minutes. It was not a complicated plan. Complicated plans required time and moving parts, and people who could be compromised, and they had none of those luxuries. What they had was 4 clean council members, a financial document that Seong-ho's people had just confirmed receiving by forwarding it to his encrypted channels, and a monitoring system that had captured every action taken in the last 57 minutes. The document isn't evidence of what Seong-ho did, she said, but the responses to it are. The forwarding logs, the call routing, the encrypted transfer at 4:07, that's 6 council members communicating directly with Seong-ho through channels they're not supposed to have. That's the violation. Not the assassination attempts. Not the stairwell. The fact that he has 6 council members running shadow communications that bypass organizational protocol. Min-jae was very still. That's a different charge, he said. It's a provable charge. You have the logs in real time. You have Dae-sung, who can present the technical forensics, and you have 4 council members who responded cleanly and who are going to walk into that session tonight and hear Seong-ho make his case for removing you. She looked at him. Unless you walk in first. The session is at 8. His pre-meeting is at 6:30. Call your 4 clean members now. Get them in a room at 6, before he briefs his people. And tell them what? The truth? All of it? The stairwell? The photograph? The communications breach? Everything. Let them see the monitoring data. Let them make their own assessment. She paused. You've been managing what people know because you were trying to control the outcome. But you can't control this outcome anymore. Seong-ho already has the votes. The only move left is to change what they're voting on. Silence. If I walk into that session with a counter-presentation and he's had 6 months to build his position, he's had 6 months, she said. You have the truth, and 4 people who are already on your side and just proved it in the last hour by not selling you out when they had the easiest opportunity in the world to do it. She held his gaze. That's not nothing, Mr. Kang. That's actually a lot. Min-jae looked at the monitoring screen, at the log of forwarded documents and encrypted calls and the 6 names that had just confirmed what they were. He looked at it for a long time. Then he picked up his phone. The next 90 minutes moved at 2 speeds simultaneously. The speed of action, which was very fast, and the speed of waiting, which was geological. Naomi was not in the room when Min-jae briefed his 4 clean council members. She had been explicitly excluded, which she accepted. There were limits to how far her presence could extend, and she understood them. She sat outside the secondary conference room, the one that shared a wall with the filing room, the wall she had stood against and listened through. And she worked through the remaining procurement authorizations because the work still existed, and ignoring it would not make it go away, and also because keeping her hands occupied kept her from coming apart at the seams. Zuri was in the executive suite with Tae-woo, who had shown a completely unexpected talent for entertaining 6-year-olds by performing what appeared to be an extensive repertoire of card tricks. Naomi had checked on them twice. Both times Zuri had waved her away without looking up from the cards. At 6:18, the secondary conference room door opened and the 4 council members filed out. Naomi looked at their faces. The faces of men who had just been given information they couldn't unknow and were now carrying its weight. They looked, she thought, like the weight was manageable. Not comfortable, but manageable. The last one, the oldest, the one who had called to say he hadn't opened the attachment, stopped beside her desk. He looked at her for a moment. He had the eyes of someone who had been in rooms like this for a very long time and had gotten good at reading what rooms contained. You built the documentation on the internal breach, he said. It wasn't a question. I noticed things, she said. I wrote them down. He held her gaze for another second. Then he nodded once and walked toward the elevator. Min-jae came out of the conference room last. He looked at her and she looked at him. and between them was the shared understanding of people who have committed to something from which retreat is no longer architecturally possible. "They're in?" she said. "They're in." "What's the play for the session?" Oh brings the communications breach to the floor before Seong-ho can introduce his motion. Forces a procedural review. Under the organization's own charter, any evidence of shadow communications between council members and an external party triggers a mandatory review process that supersedes any pending votes. He said it with the precision of someone who had spent the last 90 minutes in the organization's founding documents. The session becomes about Seong-ho's breach, not about mine. And if he contests the monitoring data, Dae-sung will present. The logs speak for themselves. He'll know immediately that the document was a test. Yes. He'll know I designed it. Yes. A pause. The pause carried something. I'm sorry. There was no version of this that didn't. Don't apologize. She used his own words from 32 days ago back at him. Not consciously. It surfaced on its own. I made a choice. Let's go finish it. The council session was at 8 p.m. on the 45th floor, in a room Naomi had never been to, a formal meeting space that existed, as far as the building directory was concerned, as a private dining reservation area. She knew it from the building schematics she had reviewed on day 4 for no reason except that she reviewed building schematics when she was in buildings. She was not invited to the session. She did not expect to be. She was in the corridor outside the executive suite at 7:55 when Seong-ho came off the elevator. He was alone, which was unusual. He almost always moved with at least one person at his shoulder. He was in a dark suit and his hair was perfect, and he walked the way he always walked, with the ease of a man who had already seen the future and found it satisfactory. He stopped when he saw her. They were 15 feet apart in a corridor that was empty except for them. June was at his station at the far end, but far enough that this was, functionally, a private moment. Seong-ho looked at her with an expression that was not the not-quite look she had catalogued over weeks. This was direct. Full attention. The look of a man who had stopped pretending. "Brooks," he said. "Mr. Park." "You've had an eventful few months." She held his gaze. "I keep busy." He tilted his head slightly. A gesture that might have been admiration in a different context. "The document this afternoon. That was elegant. Obvious in retrospect, but genuinely elegant in the moment." He paused. "You're smarter than you look." "Most people are smarter than they look," she said. "It's usually the people who assume otherwise that have problems." Something moved in his eyes. "You should have left when he fired you, the first morning. You should have taken the severance and taken your daughter and gone back to wherever it is you came from." "Chicago." "Chicago." He nodded. "You had a good exit, clean, no exposure." He let that sit for a second. "Instead, you're standing in a hallway at 7:55. "Instead, I'm standing in a hallway at 7:55, she agreed. He looked at her for a long moment with an expression she could finally, now, read accurately. It was not malice. It was not even anger. It was the expression of a man who was genuinely puzzled by something he had not accounted for in 19 years of careful planning, a variable that didn't fit his model. "It won't be enough," he said. "Whatever you've prepared, whatever he's bringing into that room tonight. I've been building this for 6 years. You've been here 32 days. She said nothing. "Walk away," he said. Not a threat. Almost gentle. "Take the child. Walk away. Whatever happens in that room in 5 minutes doesn't have to touch you." "It already touched me," she said. "When you put your car outside my daughter's school." His expression didn't change. "That was a message." "I got it." "Then you understand what I'm capable of." "I understand what you're willing to do." She held his gaze. "I want you to understand something in return. I am not a bodyguard. I am not an operative. I am not a person who hurts people for a living." She paused. "But I am the person who has been watching this floor for 32 days and writing everything down. And I am the person who built the case that's walking into that room in 4 minutes. And I am the person standing between you and what you want." She let that sit. "I think you should go to your meeting, Mr. Park." He looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. Then he walked past her toward the elevator to the 45th floor, and she watched him go. And she stood in the corridor and breathed, and her hands were completely steady, and her heart was going at approximately twice its normal rate, and both of those things were equally true, and she let them be. The next 2 hours were the worst kind of waiting. She sat at her desk. She worked. She checked on Zuri twice. Asleep by 9, which was late, but not catastrophically late. Tae-woo had managed a bedtime negotiation that had apparently involved the promise of more card tricks tomorrow. She drank the cold coffee she hadn't touched since 3:47, and it was terrible, and she drank it anyway. At 9:15, Dae-sung came to her desk. He was a man of extreme economy. She had noticed this about him from the first moment, the way he used the fewest possible words for any communication. He set a tablet in front of her. On the screen was the monitoring log, updated in real time. He pointed to a timestamp, 8:47 p.m., an outbound call from Seong-ho's personal device. Duration, 4 minutes. Routed to an external number that Dae-sung had highlighted in red. Beneath it, a note in Dae-sung's handwriting. Number belongs to a logistics contractor. Eastern cargo routes. No organizational affiliation on record. She looked at the note, looked at the timestamp. The council session had started at 8. 47 minutes in, Seong-ho had stepped out to make a 4-minute call to a logistics contractor with no organizational affiliation. "What does that mean?" she said. Dae-sung looked at her with the expression of a man who rarely used words but was about to. "It means he made a contingency call," he said. "Before the vote." She stared at the screen. "He already knew he was going to lose," she said. "I think so, yes." "Then what's the contingency?" Dae-sung didn't answer. He didn't need to. She was already reaching for her phone, the personal one, the one with 4 contacts in Seoul, and she was pulling up the number for the operative who had texted her package secure and floor clear, and she was dialing. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail, and she dialed again, and on the second ring it picked up. "The school," she said. "Right now. Eyes on the school, the route, and the building entrance." Her voice was level. She was very focused on keeping it level. "Something changed. I don't know what, but something changed 47 minutes ago, and I need—" "Ma'am." The operative's voice cut across hers. He sounded like a man who was already moving. "We have eyes on the school. There's a sound in the background. Motion. There's a vehicle, blue panel van, no plates, been parked on the service road since—" Her chair hit the wall when she stood up. "Get to the entrance," she said. "Now." She was already moving toward Zuri's door when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't have saved, different from the one she'd been calling, a new number. And the message was 4 words that, the 4 words on the screen were, "They have the girl." Naomi read them once. She read them again. Her brain did the thing it did under maximum pressure. It went very quiet, very fast, the way a city goes quiet in the seconds after a power failure before anyone understands what has happened. Then she moved. She went through Zuri's door, and the bed was empty, and the yellow jacket was gone from the hook by the door, and the window was latched from the inside, which meant the window wasn't how they did it, which meant the front entry, which meant someone inside the building had opened a door for them, and she turned and she was already running. Tae-woo was in the hallway outside the East Wing entry. He was on the floor, not unconscious, sitting up, hand pressed to the back of his head, blinking with the specific disorientation of someone who had been hit hard and recently. There was blood on his collar. Not a lot. Enough. "How many?" she said. 2. His voice was thick. They came through the service entry. Which way?" He pointed toward the freight elevator at the end of the residence corridor. She was already going. She hit the stairwell door instead of waiting for the elevator because the elevator was a box with 1 exit, and she was not getting into a box right now. She took the stairs down, her hand on the railing, her feet finding each step in the dark of the stairwell without slowing, and she was calling the operative back as she ran, and he picked up on the first ring this time. "They're inside the building," she said. "Freight elevator. 2 men. They have my daughter. Where are you?" "Lobby level," he said, and she could hear him running too, the breath-caught rhythm of it. "The van moved 5 minutes ago. It was a distraction. It pulled out when I focused on it. I lost the lobby. Don't let them get to a vehicle. Nobody leaves this building with my daughter." She hit the 28th floor landing and kept going. "You understand me. Nobody." "Yes, ma'am." She hung up and ran. They were in the parking structure. She came through the ground-level stairwell door into the basement and saw them immediately. Two men in dark clothing moving fast toward the far end of the structure where the service vehicles were parked, and between them, held by the wrist and being dragged with the stumbling half-run of a small child trying to keep up with adult legs, was Zuri. Zuri was not crying. Naomi's daughter was not crying. She was doing the thing Naomi had not known she was capable of. She was watching. Even being dragged through a parking structure by strangers, she was watching with her dark, precise eyes, cataloging, filing. And when she saw her mother come through the stairwell door 40 meters behind her, she did not cry out. She did not struggle. She made eye contact with Naomi and she held it. Smart girl. Naomi had never loved her more than in that second. Naomi did not call out. Calling out told them she was behind them, gave them reaction time, gave them the half-second to do something she could not let them do. She ran silent, closing the distance in the echoing concrete dark of the parking structure, and she was 20 meters back when the taller of the two men heard her footsteps and turned. He had time to turn completely and raise one hand before Naomi hit him. She was not a trained fighter. She wanted to be clear about that, at least to herself, in the fraction of a second before impact. She had no combat training, no martial arts, no institutional preparation for this. What she had was 172 pounds of determined mother moving at full speed and the absolute conviction that she had nothing left to lose. She hit him low, shoulder into his midsection, and they went down together on the concrete, and the impact was brutal and total, and she felt it in every bone from her shoulder to her hip, and she did not stop. She scrambled, grabbed his arm, used her weight to pin it, and she bit down on his wrist with everything she had. He screamed. The second man, the one holding Zuri, let go. He let go because he needed both hands to reach for what was at his belt, and Zuri, 6 years old and watching everything, felt the grip release and ran. She ran toward her mother without hesitation, without looking back, pure instinct carrying her the 15 feet between them in 2 seconds flat. "Mama, keep running!" Naomi had one knee on the man beneath her and was pulling herself upright, and her shoulder was screaming, and she didn't care. "Stairwell, the door I came through, go." "But, Zuri, now." Zuri ran. The second man had his weapon out. Naomi looked at it. She looked at him. He was young. Younger than she'd expected, 20s, with the careful blankness of someone who had been trained to have no expression during operational moments. His hand was steady. "Step back," he said. She stepped back. Her hands came up. Not in surrender. In the automatic human gesture of showing empty palms, buying seconds. "On the ground," he said. She didn't go to the ground. She stayed standing. Not bravery, calculation. On the ground, she had nothing. Standing, she had the 2 inches of height she needed for the thing she was watching develop over his shoulder. June hit him from behind like a wall falling. The weapon skittered across the concrete. The young man went down under 220 pounds of Minji's lead bodyguard and did not get back up. 2 more operatives came through the vehicle entry at the far end of the structure, and the first man, the one whose wrist Naomi had bitten, was already being pulled to his feet with his arms behind him. Naomi stood in the parking structure with her hands still raised and slowly lowered them. Her shoulder felt like it had been taken apart and reassembled incorrectly. Her knees were shaking. She pressed her hands flat against her thighs and pressed until the shaking was less. From the stairwell door came the sound of small running feet, and then Zuri hit her at full speed, arms around her waist, face pressed into her side, and she was not crying either. She was breathing hard, fast and ragged, and she was holding on with the grip of someone who understood, at 6 years old, that some things you didn't let go of. Naomi wrapped both arms around her daughter and held on. Her shoulder screamed. She did not let go. The parking structure took 40 minutes to clear and document. Naomi sat on the hood of a black SUV with Zuri between her knees, her daughter's back against her chest, both of them wrapped in the emergency blanket that one of the operatives had produced from somewhere. Zuri had finally stopped shaking. Naomi had not. At some point, Minjae appeared. She heard the soft electric hum of his chair before she saw him, coming through the vehicle entry with June 2 steps behind and an expression on his face that was the most unguarded she had ever seen it. He looked like a man who had been in a council session 45 floors above this parking structure and had heard something over an earpiece that had made him leave the session in the middle of a vote. He stopped in front of her. He looked at Zuri first, at the blanket, at the small face turned slightly into her mother's arm. Then he looked at Naomi. She looked back. She didn't have the energy for anything more organized than that. Just looking. "The vote," she said. "It passed." His voice was quiet. 6-5 became 5-5 when Wu changed his position at the last minute. Procedural deadlock. Under the charter, deadlock on a removal motion defaults to status quo. A pause. Seong-ho's motion failed. She absorbed that. He had 6 votes. "Wu has a son," Min-jae said. Seong-ho made a promise to that son 4 years ago regarding a business arrangement. The promise was never kept. I found the documentation this afternoon and made sure Wu saw it. He paused. "You reminded me. You said the truth was what I had, and I should use all of it." She looked at him for a long moment. "The contingency call," she said. "The logistics contractor. That was this." "Yes. When the vote started going wrong, he activated a secondary plan. Direct action, outside the organization's structure. Take you off the board." His jaw moved. "Take what mattered to you." Zuri had gone still and quiet in a way that might have been sleep, or might have been the careful stillness of a child listening to adult conversation and understanding more of it than the adults would prefer. "He's gone?" Naomi said. "He won't be found," Min-jae said. She had known, on some level, that this was what that meant. She let herself know it fully now, in the fluorescent half-light of a parking structure with her daughter's weight against her chest. She let it be what it was, and she did not dress it in anything more comfortable. "Okay," she said. It was not forgiveness or endorsement or anything she could have articulated cleanly. It was simply the acknowledgement that she was here and Zuri was here, and the thing that had been moving toward them for weeks had been stopped. And the cost of stopping it was something she would carry, but could carry, which was all you could ever ask of a weight. "Okay," she said again. The shoulder was a partial separation, not a full tear. The emergency physician who came to the penthouse at midnight used words like significant strain and several weeks in physiotherapy, and Naomi sat on the couch and let him tape it, while Zuri slept in the next room in the real bed, with the good mattress and the city glittering outside the window. After the physician left, the penthouse was quiet in a way that felt earned, like a silence that had paid its dues. Min-jae was in the main study, the connecting door open. She could see the light from it, the warm amber of the desk lamp. She had been aware of him the way she had been aware of the building settling around her for weeks. A presence that had become part of the architecture, something she had stopped noticing she was noticing. She got up. Her shoulder protested in specific, detailed terms. She moved to the connecting doorway and stood in it. He was at his desk with a glass of something amber that he hadn't touched. The city spread out beyond the window, the Han River catching the light of 10,000 buildings. He looked like a man who had been sitting with something for a long time and was almost ready to say it out loud. He looked up when she appeared. "You should sleep," he said. "I know." She didn't move. He didn't look away. "The 2 men in the parking structure," she said. "The young one. He was scared." "Yes, he was following orders." "He would have hurt you," Min-jae said. "He would have hurt Zuri." "I know." She leaned her good shoulder against the doorframe. "I'm not asking you to feel bad about it. I'm just saying, he was young and scared and following orders, and that's how it works, and it's still something." Min-jae looked at his untouched glass. "Yes," he said. "It is." They stayed with that for a moment, the acknowledgement of it, the specific weight of a world that did not offer clean outcomes. "The Incheon corridor," she said. "Director Lim, that's still unresolved." "It is. And Councilman Beck. Beck will face a formal review. He'll be removed from the council. Whether he faces anything beyond that depends on what he tells the review panel. And the organization, without Seong-ho's network holding it, there are going to be gaps." "Yes." He picked up the glass, finally. Didn't drink from it, just held it. "There's a significant amount of work ahead." She nodded. "I need someone who is not afraid of what they see," he said, "who writes things down, who notices the auxiliary stairwell door and counts 6 minutes in a doorway and builds a case out of shipping logs that everyone else looked at and didn't read. He set the glass down. He looked at her directly. I need someone whose judgment I trust completely. I have not trusted anyone completely in 5 years. She looked at him for a long time. That's a heavy thing to put on a person, she said. I know. I'm still your employee. I know that too. I dropped things, she said. I knocked a paperweight off a desk on day 1. I spilled water on a laptop. I carried a coffee tray for 11 days, and I never once made it from the elevator to the office without something rattling. I know, he said. I noticed. And you kept me anyway. You moved first, he said, when the window broke, before anyone. You moved first and you put yourself between me and the open space, and you didn't think about it. He paused. I have 12 trained operatives on this floor. None of them have your instincts. None of them have your judgment. And none of them would have built what you built out of nothing in 32 days without being asked. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, a plane moved across the sky above the river, its lights blinking slow and even. I need to know Zuri is safe, she said. Not managed, not protected by people I don't know. Safe. Really safe. That means her school, her route, her daily life. All of it has a structure I can see and verify and trust. I'll build it with you, whatever you specify. And she doesn't know what happens on this floor, not the details. She's 6. Agreed. And I want a real contract, she said, not a security addendum to an assistance agreement. A real contract that says clearly what my role is and what I'm entitled to and what you owe me if any of this goes wrong again. I'll have legal draft it tomorrow. She straightened up from the doorframe. Her shoulder sent a sharp reminder of itself and she absorbed it. I'm going to sleep, she said. He nodded. She turned and then she stopped because there was one more thing and she was going to say it or she was going to carry it, and she was tired of carrying things she didn't have to. When Zuri asked if you were the boss, she said without turning, you said yes. A pause. I did. She told me tonight when I was putting her to bed that she thinks you're sad. She paused. She says sad people make good bosses because they pay attention. The silence behind her had a quality she couldn't see but could feel. Something shifting in it. Something making room. She's 6, he said. She's very accurate, Naomi said. I've checked. She walked back to the east wing and she closed the connecting door behind her and she went to stand in Zuri's doorway for the 3rd time that night. Zuri was sprawled in the particular boneless way of children who slept with complete conviction, one arm thrown across the pillow, the covers halfway to the floor. Naomi pulled the covers back up. She tucked them in around her daughter's shoulder the way she had done every night since Zuri was born, in Chicago apartments and Seoul rentals, and a penthouse 32 floors above a city that had tried to take them apart. She turned off the lamp. She went to her room and she lay down on the good mattress and she looked at the ceiling. 3 weeks later, the East Wing had a second bookshelf. Zuri had requested it, in the formal manner she had recently adopted for requests she considered significant, standing very straight and making direct eye contact and stating her case without preamble. The case had been, one bookshelf was not enough, and she had already organized her books by color, and there was no room for the ones she was going to get from the school book fair. Min-jae had arranged the bookshelf. He had also, without being asked and without mentioning it, arranged for a small work table to be installed near the window, the right height for a 6-year-old, with a surface that could be wiped clean of clay. Zuri had accepted these additions with the measured approval of someone who had expected no less. On the morning that the new bookshelf arrived, Min-jae came through the connecting door while Zuri was arranging her books. The orange and red ones first, she had decided, as a tribute to the campaign. And he stopped in the doorway and watched her with an expression that Naomi, from the kitchen counter with her coffee, could see clearly. It was the warmth thing. All the way to the surface, not buried, not compressed, not held in reserve, just present. He had not had this in his life. She had understood that gradually, the way you understood something about a room that you had been in for a while. The things that were missing shaped the space as clearly as the things that were there. No family in the building, no visitors who weren't professional. The framed painting on the office wall that was the only personal item in a space otherwise built entirely around function. A man who had run an organization for 5 years since the bomb, and had not, in 5 years, trusted anyone completely. Until a woman came in with a coffee tray she couldn't control and moved first when the window broke. Zuri looked up from her books and saw him in the doorway. The orange ones go on top, she informed him. Because orange is important. He looked at the row of orange-spined books on the top shelf. Is that organizational principle or personal preference? Both, Zuri said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Zuri considered this. No, she agreed. They're not. Naomi drank her coffee and did not say anything. She watched her daughter and this man conduct their negotiations over bookshelf philosophy with the seriousness both of them brought to things that mattered, and she felt something she had been careful about feeling for a long time. She let herself feel it. The private study, late evening, 3 weeks and 4 days after the parking structure. Naomi had been summoned. That was the word Tae-woo had used when he knocked. Mr. Kang requests your presence in the study. She had looked up from the procurement stack she was still working through. The work continued, would always continue. There was always more work, and she had said she'd be there in 10 minutes, and she had been there in 8, because the procurement stack was actually almost done. The study overlooked the city. She had been in it twice. Once early on, when she was still learning the geography of the 62nd floor, and once the night after the council session, when she had stood in the connecting doorway and they had said the things they said. It was a smaller room than the main office, bookshelves on 2 walls, a desk that was older than anything else in the building and had the quality of something that had been brought from somewhere else and mattered. Min-jae was behind the desk. On the desk was a small box, black lacquer, about the size of a closed fist, with no markings on it. He looked at her when she came in. He did not gesture to a chair. She stood in front of the desk and looked at the box and then at him. Sit down, Naomi. She sat. He did not touch the box immediately. He looked at her with the unhurried directness that she had spent 32 days learning to meet without flinching and had now been meeting without difficulty for longer than that. When the bomb went off 5 years ago, he said, I was in the car with my father. He died. I didn't. He said it in the flat voice of someone who had said it to himself so many times it had worn into a groove. The people who planted it were inside our organization. 2 of them are dead. 1 disappeared. A pause. 1 turned out to be Seong-ho. She was very still. He gave the location, Min-jae said. Not the bomb. He didn't build it, but he told the people who did where my father would be and when. He'd been their asset for 3 years before that. His jaw set. My father trusted him, built him, gave him everything he had to give. He looked at the lacquer box. I found out 2 days after the council session. The review panel turned up the communication records. 19 years, the whole thing. The room was very quiet. I'm sorry, she said. He shook his head once, not dismissing the condolence, processing it. I kept him for 5 years after the bomb because I didn't know. Because he was good at what he did and the organization needed what he provided, and because he stopped. Because I wasn't sure enough. I needed to be sure. He looked at her. You gave me sure. She held his gaze. The folder, she said. The folder, the communications breach. All of it. A pause. You were 32 days into this building, and you gave me what I spent 5 years looking for. She didn't have words for that. She let it sit. He opened the lacquer box. Inside, on a bed of dark silk, was a ring. Gold, heavy, with a flat face engraved with a pattern she recognized. Angular, structured, the same pattern as the brushstrokes on the painting in the main office. Old. The kind of object that had been handled by many hands over a long time and carried the weight of that. My grandfather's, he said. And his father's before that. It passes to the person who holds the trust of the family. He paused. Not the organization, the family. She looked at the ring for a long time. You don't have a family, she said. Not unkindly, just the fact of it. I have a daughter who organizes her books by color, he said. And her mother. The city outside the window was doing what it always did. Burning with light, enormous and relentless. Full of people making calculations about what they could afford and what they couldn't and what they would pay to keep the things that mattered. I'm not going to be a different person, she said. I drop things. I take notes that nobody asked for. I notice things that make powerful people uncomfortable. I have opinions about everything, and I say most of them. She looked at him. And I will always, always put Zuri first, before this organization, before any of it. I know, he said. That's why it's you. She looked at the ring. She thought about day 3, about the parking structure and the concrete and her shoulder, about the filing room and the wall and the fragments she had stood still to hear, about a yellow jacket and an orange clay campaign and a child who said sad people made good bosses because they paid attention. She reached out and picked up the ring. It was heavier than it looked. It always was, she thought, with things that meant something. She did not put it on. She held it in her palm and felt the weight of it, and looked at Min Jae across the desk, and he looked back. And between them was everything that had happened and everything that had been survived and the specific understanding of 2 people who had been through the kind of things that showed you who you actually were when nobody was watching. I have one more condition, she said. He almost smiled. Of course you do. Zuri teaches you the card tricks Tae-woo showed her. She's been practicing. She wants to show someone, and I'm the only audience she has. The warmth thing moved all the way up and stayed. That seems fair, he said. Naomi closed her fingers around the ring. Outside, Seoul stretched to the horizon in every direction, towers and bridges, and the long silver thread of the river running through all of it, carrying the city's reflection out towards somewhere beyond the edge of what could be seen from here. Somewhere past the last light, past the last tower, out where the river met the dark, and the dark met everything else. She had come here from Chicago with 2 suitcases and a 6-year-old and a business degree from a mid-tier university and the specific unglamorous kind of intelligence that watched and filed and connected things without making a show of it. She had walked off an elevator with a coffee tray she couldn't quite control, and she had dropped things and noticed things and written things down, and she had been afraid, consistently and specifically, of all the things that were worth being afraid of. She was still afraid of things. She expected she always would be. Fear, she had learned, was not the absence of courage. It was the context in which courage operated, the thing that made it mean something when you moved anyway. She had moved. She was still moving. Naomi Brooks set the ring down on the desk between them, not refusing it, not accepting it yet, just setting it in the space that belonged to both of them now. And she looked at Kang Min-jae across the city light and the old desk and the weight of everything they'd come through, and she said, "Let's get to work." He reached forward and picked up the ring. He held it out to her. She took it. The city burned on outside the window, indifferent and magnificent and full of people who had no idea that 32 floors below the top of one of its towers, something had just been decided that was not about power or money or the long cold machinery of organized survival. Something smaller than that. Something that had cost more. Zuri slept in the east wing with her orange books on the top shelf and the clay-stained work table by the window, dreaming whatever 6-year-olds dreamed in cities that never went dark. And in the study overlooking everything, 2 people who had survived the particular education of learning what they were made of sat with the weight of a gold ring between them and the long work of everything that came next already beginning, already underway, already the first line of a story that neither of them could have written from the beginning, because neither of them had known, at the beginning, who they were going to have to become. They knew now. That was enough. That was in the end exactly enough.